I overheard my daughter-in-law Margaret tell her friends I was just a glorified babysitter. They kept around because I was cheaper than daycare. 15 years I'd given up my retirement dreams to help raise my grandchildren while they built their careers. What they didn't know was that I'd been silently managing my late husband's investment portfolio worth over $2 million. And it was time they learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning was brisk as I stood in my son's driveway, watching my breath form little clouds in the air. I checked my watch, 5:45 a.m., and pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. The neighborhood was still dark, front porches, illuminated only by motion sensor lights that flickered on as early morning joggers passed by. I'd been making this same trek 6 days a week for 15 years, arriving before dawn to ensure my son and his wife could leave for work without worrying about their children. I never planned to spend my golden years folding tiny socks and cutting crusts off sandwiches. At 55, when most of my friends were planning cruises and taking up watercolor painting, I was learning how to install child safety locks and memorizing the lyrics to those awful singing cartoon characters my grandchildren loved. That wasn't how Harold and I had mapped out our retirement. Harold, my husband of 32 years, had been meticulous about planning for our future. "Ruth," he would say, studying his investment statements at our kitchen table, "when I'm gone, don't let anyone tell you what to do with this money. I'm building this so you can live however you want." His eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled. "Promise me you'll see Venice, take that cooking course in France, visit the grandkids. When you want to, not because you have to." I'd smile back and promise, neither of us knowing he'd be gone just 3 years into our retirement, a sudden heart attack taking him one ordinary Tuesday afternoon while I was out grocery shopping. I came home to find him in his favorite armchair, the newspaper still open on his lap, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking for all the world like he was just taking a nap. The loneliness that followed was suffocating. Our Vermont farmhouse, once filled with plans and possibilities, became a museum of what might have been. Each room echoed with his absence, the mudroom where his boots still stood, the workshop where his tools hung neatly on pegboard, the garden he'd never see bloom again. I wandered those rooms at night, touching his things, wondering how to navigate a future we'd always planned to share. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Mom?" James's voice cracked through the receiver. "We need help." My son had always been stoic like his father, so the tremor in his voice immediately sent my heart racing. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Is it the baby?" Emma, my first grandchild, had been born just 3 weeks earlier. I'd driven down to Boston for the birth, staying a week to help get them settled. Margaret, my daughter-in-law, had seemed overwhelmed but managing. Their apartment was small but adequate, and they both had promising careers. James in financial services, Margaret in marketing. "It's Margaret," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's not okay. The doctor says it's severe postpartum depression. She can barely get out of bed some days. I've taken all my leave, but I have to go back to work next week. We can't afford to lose either income with the new mortgage and student loans. The cheapest daycare we found costs more than our car payment." I could hear the baby crying in the background, and something in me shifted, a resolve hardening in my chest. "I'll come," I said without hesitation. "Mom, we can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I'm offering." I looked around at the empty rooms that no longer felt like home. "Give me a week to make arrangements." Within a month, I had sold the farmhouse where Harold and I had planned to grow old together. The real estate market was strong, and the sale provided enough to buy a small condo just 15 minutes from James and Margaret's home in suburban Boston. I kept a few pieces of furniture, Harold's favorite books, and our photo albums. The rest, the life we'd built together, I let go. "You don't have to do this," my sister Clara said when she helped me pack. "You can visit them, send money if they need it, but selling your home, moving to a city you don't know, at your age?" "At my age," I repeated, carefully wrapping Harold's fishing trophies in newspaper. "I'm 55, Clara, not 95. Besides, what else would I do? Sit here alone and talk to Harold's empty chair?" What was supposed to be temporary help during a crisis somehow stretched into months, then years, then over a decade. Margaret's depression eventually improved with therapy and medication, but by then, another baby was on the way. The twins, Lucas and Lily, arrived when Emma was 3, beautiful, robust babies with Harold's dimples and James's curious eyes. "Mom, we'd be drowning without you," James said one night, as I rocked Lily to sleep while he walked the floor with a colicky, "Lucas, I don't know how we can ever repay you." I smiled, breathing in the sweet scent of my granddaughter's head. "You don't have to repay family, James. I was there for every milestone. First steps, first words, first days of school. When James got promoted to regional manager requiring frequent travel, I stepped in. When Margaret decided to pursue her master's degree to advance her career, I adjusted my schedule. When both worked late, I was there, making dinner, supervising homework, reading bedtime stories. I learned each child's preferences by heart. Emma liked her sandwiches cut diagonally and hated the crusts. Lucas wouldn't eat anything green but would devour broccoli if I called them tiny trees, and Lily needed her stuffed penguin to fall asleep. I knew which teachers were kind, which neighborhood kids were trouble, and exactly how long it took to get from piano lessons to soccer practice with a stop for ice cream in between. I put my own dreams on hold, the cooking classes I'd wanted, to take at the local community college, the European trip Harold and I had always planned, the book club I never had time to join. My retirement savings remained untouched, supplemented by Harold's life insurance and investments I managed quietly after the children were in bed. Harold had been methodical in teaching me about investing. In the early years of our marriage, he'd set aside one evening a week to go over our finances with me. "Never put all your eggs in one basket, Ruthie," he'd say. "Diversify. Think long-term. Be patient." After he died, I honored his memory by continuing to manage our portfolio carefully, watching it grow year after year while living modestly on my Social Security benefits. I rarely bought new clothes or splurged on myself. My condo remained sparsely furnished, more a place to sleep than a home. Every extra penny went toward birthday presents for the grandchildren or contributing to their college funds without James and Margaret knowing. I set up separate accounts for each child, quietly, transferring money on their birthdays and Christmas, planning to surprise them when they were ready for college. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," James would say, kissing my cheek as he rushed out the door at 6 a.m., briefcase in hand, travel coffee mug sloshing. "I don't know what we'd do without you." I'd smile and wave him off, thinking how much he looked like Harold when he was rushing off to work, always a little harried, always running 5 minutes behind. In those moments, I felt a bittersweet joy. I'd lost my husband, but here was his son, carrying on his mannerisms, his determination, his sense of responsibility. Margaret was always more reserved than James. Where he was effusive in his gratitude, she was measured, practical. In the early years when she was struggling with depression, I'd catch her watching me with the baby, her eyes hollow and distant. I never pushed, never judged. I'd simply hand Emma to her when she seemed ready, stepping back, giving her space to find her footing as a mother. Over time, I thought we had developed a mutual respect, maybe even a friendship of sorts. She'd bring me little gifts sometimes, scented, candles or bath salts, and say things like, "We couldn't do this without you, Ruth." I believed her. I thought I had become an integral part of their family, not just James's mother, but Margaret's ally, her children's beloved grandmother. The twins had just turned 10, and Emma was approaching 13 when everything changed. Their house, a spacious colonial in a good school district that they'd upgraded to 5 years earlier, was buzzing with activity. Margaret had recently been promoted to marketing director at her firm, and James was on track for a vice presidency. Their careers were thriving, their children were flourishing, and I took quiet pride in having helped create the stable foundation that made it all possible. I had arrived early one Saturday to help with the children while James and Margaret hosted a dinner party for her colleagues that evening. The autumn air had turned chilly, but the house was warm, filled with the scent of the pot roast I'd started in the slow cooker that morning. Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and the twins were in the basement playroom, absorbed in a video game that involved building virtual worlds. I was in the kitchen unpacking groceries for the dinner party. Imported cheeses, prosciutto, those tiny fancy olives Margaret liked, when I heard voices drifting in from the back patio through the open window. Margaret and two women I recognized, as her co-workers were sitting around the fire pit, wine glasses in hand, enjoying the unseasonably warm afternoon. "God, you're so lucky to have live-in help," one of them said. "Childcare costs are killing us. Jeff and I are practically working just to pay the nanny." Margaret laughed, the sound of ice clinking in her glass. "Ruth, she's just a glorified babysitter, honestly." "But you're right. We are lucky. Do you know how much we save? Professional nannies around here charge $25 an hour. At least my mother-in-law works for free." I froze, a block of imported Gouda suspended in my hand halfway to the refrigerator. Surely I'd misheard. I moved closer to the window, telling myself Margaret wouldn't speak about me that way, not after 15 years of shared family life. "Doesn't she ever want to, have her own life?" the other woman asked, her voice curious rather than unkind. "What life?" Margaret replied, lowering her voice slightly but not enough. "She's 70, her husband's dead, and she never developed any real interests or skills. This arrangement works for everyone. She gets to feel useful, and we get free childcare. She'd probably just be sitting alone watching game shows otherwise." The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling across the kitchen floor. My heart hammered in my chest as their laughter drifted through the window. 15 years of love and sacrifice reduced to economic convenience. Not a beloved grandmother, not a mother helping her family, just a cost-saving measure. Just a babysitter. Just an old woman with no life of her own. "I do feel bad sometimes," Margaret continued, her voice softening with what sounded like practiced empathy. "She's given up a lot for us, but honestly, what else would she do? At least this way, she's involved in the kids' lives." "Still," the first woman persisted, "doesn't it get awkward? Having your mother-in-law around so much? I'd go crazy if my husband's mother was in my house every day." Margaret sighed dramatically. "You have no idea. The woman has opinions about everything. How I discipline the kids, what I feed them, even how I fold their laundry. But I've learned to tune it out. Small price to pay for free childcare, right? And James is such a mama's boy, he'd never ask her to back off." I gathered the fallen oranges with trembling hands, my mind racing. Had they always seen me this way? Had my son also spoken about me like this when I wasn't around? I thought of the birthdays I'd spent making their children's favorite cakes instead of traveling with my friends, the doctor's appointments I'd rearranged my schedule for, the school events I'd attended when they were too busy. "I don't know how you stand it," the second woman said. "My mother-in-law visits for a weekend, and I need therapy afterward." "Oh, Ruth isn't that bad," Margaret said with a laugh. "She's just simple, easy to manage if you know how. Just compliment her casserole and let her think she's indispensable." The women laughed, and I heard the clink of wine glasses being refilled. I'd heard enough. I quietly finished putting away the groceries, mechanically checking the pot roast, wiping down the counters. My movements felt disconnected from my body, as if I were watching someone else perform these familiar tasks. I went down to the basement to check on the twins. Lucas and Lily were sprawled on beanbag chairs, controllers in hand, faces illuminated. by the screen's glow. "Grandma, look!" Lucas exclaimed, not taking his eyes off the game. "We built a castle with a moat and everything." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to run home for a bit. I forgot. Something important. Your mom's on the patio with her friends if you need anything." "Okay," they chorused, already absorbed back in their virtual world. I slipped out the front door without saying goodbye to Margaret. I couldn't face her. Not yet. Not while her words were still ringing in my ears. I drove back to my condo on autopilot, my mind replaying fragments of the conversation. Glorified babysitter. Works for free. Simple. Easy to manage. My condo was quiet and cool when I entered, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the bare walls. I'd never bothered to decorate properly, telling myself it wasn't worth the effort since I spent most of my time at James and Margaret's house. Now I saw it through different eyes. A place devoid of personality. A stopping place rather than a home. A reflection of how little I'd valued my own comfort and joy. I walked to the spare bedroom I used as an office and sat down at the computer desk. With practiced movements, I logged into my investment accounts James and Margaret knew nothing about. The numbers that appeared on the screen had long since ceased to surprise me, but today they took on new significance. In all these years, neither James nor Margaret had ever asked about my finances. They assumed I was just getting by on my modest Social Security checks. They never knew that Harold, quiet and methodical, had been a brilliant investor who left me with a substantial portfolio. They never knew I had continued to grow those investments, learning to manage them myself, tracking them meticulously every night after the children were asleep. The balance across my accounts totaled just over $2.3 million. More than enough for me to have hired help for myself rather than being their help. More than enough for me to have been traveling the world instead of driving carpools. More than enough to ensure I would never need to depend on anyone for financial support, no matter how long I lived. Every day I chose to be, there was a choice made from love, not necessity. A choice they had never recognized or valued. I printed out account statements, then opened the bottom drawer of the desk where I kept important documents. Harold's life insurance policy, our marriage certificate, the deed to my condo, and, buried beneath them all, a glossy brochure I'd picked up at a travel agency years ago. Luxury European river cruises, see the world in style. The brochure was worn from handling, the corners softened from the many times I'd taken it out over the years, allowing myself to daydream for a few moments before returning it to its hiding place. Budapest, Vienna, Prague. Cities Harold and I had planned to visit together, now just faded images on glossy paper. As I stood in my sparse condo, the weight of Margaret's casual cruelty pressing down on me, something shifted inside my heart. The brochure went back on top of the desk, not hidden away this time. The account statements beside it, black and white proof of the life I could have been living all along. My hands stopped trembling, my spine straightened, and for the first time in 15 years, I began to wonder what my life could look like, if I chose myself for once. My phone rang just as I was looking up travel agencies online. The screen flashed with James's name, and I hesitated before answering. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. "Are you okay? Margaret said you left without saying goodbye. The kids said you forgot something important." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I needed some time to think, James." "Think about what? Is everything all right?" Genuine concern colored his voice, which only made what I had to do harder. "I overheard Margaret talking with her friends on the patio," I said, keeping my voice level. "I heard what she really thinks of me." There was a long pause. "What do you mean, Mom?" "She called me a glorified babysitter, said I work for free, that I'm simple and easy to manage, that you're a mama's boy who would never ask me to back off." The words still stung, fresh and raw. "Oh." Another pause. "Mom, I'm sure she didn't mean—" "She meant every word, James." I cut him off, surprising myself with my firmness. "And I need to know, do you feel the same way?" "Of course not." He sounded offended, but there was something else in his voice, something that made me doubt him. "Listen, Margaret sometimes says things without thinking when she's with her work friends. You know how she gets when she's trying to impress people. I'm sure she was just what, James? Just reducing 15 years of my life to a financial calculation? Just mocking the grandmother of her children behind my back?" My voice cracked, betraying the hurt I was trying to contain. "Mom, please, she didn't mean to hurt you." He was using his placating voice now, the one I'd heard him use with difficult clients. "Why don't you come back over? We can talk about this. I'm sure Margaret feels terrible." "Does she even know I overheard?" I asked, another telling pause. "No, not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "So she's not sorry," I said flatly. "She just doesn't know she was caught." "Mom, that's not fair. Look, we both appreciate everything. You do for us, for the kids. You know that, right? We couldn't manage without you." Those words, which once would have warmed my heart, now felt hollow. Couldn't manage, or couldn't afford to manage? There's a difference, James. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm taking some time for myself. I won't be available to watch the children for a while. His voice shifted instantly from concerned to alarmed. "Wait, what? Mom? We have the charity gala next Saturday. Margaret's firm is being honored. We have to be there. We were counting on you to stay with the kids. I'm sure you can find a babysitter," I said, borrowing Margaret's term, "someone you actually have to pay this time." "Mom!" Now he sounded genuinely distressed. "This is really important for Margaret's career. We can't just find someone at the last minute that we trust with the kids overnight." "You've had 15 years of last-minute requests, James. 15. Years of me rearranging my life to accommodate yours. I think you can manage this one on your own." "Is this about money?" he asked suddenly. "Because if that's the issue, we can pay you." "We've always offered—" "This isn't about money," I said, although the assumption stung. "This is about respect, about recognizing that I have a life beyond being your free childcare." "Of course you do. No one's saying otherwise. Aren't they? When was the last time either of you asked me about my interests, my dreams? When was the last time you considered that I might want to travel, take classes, make friends my own age?" The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "That's what I thought," I said softly. "Mom, please, just come back so we can talk about this. I can get Margaret to apologize. We can work something out. I'll call you in a few days, James. I need some time to think." I ended the call before he could protest further. Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole to see Margaret standing there, perfectly put together in her designer jeans and cashmere sweater, a bottle of wine in one hand and a gift bag in the other. The perfect peace offering. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Ruth," she said, her smile professional and practiced. "James told me what happened. I feel just awful about it. I brought your favorite Chardonnay and those chocolates you like from that little shop in Cambridge." She held out the gifts, but I made no move to take them. "Did James tell you to come here?" I asked. Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, yes, but I wanted to come. I feel terrible that you overheard that conversation. I was just blowing off steam with the girls, you know how it is. It didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me, Margaret," she sighed, looking genuinely frustrated now. "Ruth, I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry if my words hurt you. It was thoughtless girl talk, that's all. We value everything you do for us." Value or exploit? The word came out before I could stop it. Her eyes widened. Genuine shock replacing the practiced contrition. Excuse me? You heard me. For 15 years, I've given up my own life to help raise your children. I've been there for every crisis, every celebration, every ordinary Tuesday. And in return, you talk about me like, I'm the help. Margaret's expression hardened, the polite veneer cracking. That's not fair, Ruth. We've always been grateful for your help. But let's be honest. What else would you be doing? You're alone, your husband is gone, and at your age, it's not like you have a career to pursue. We gave you purpose, a reason, to get up in the morning. There it was, the raw, unvarnished truth of how she saw me. Not as a woman with her own dreams and ambitions, but as an empty vessel whose only value came from serving their needs. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for your honesty, Margaret. Now let me be honest with you. I won't be available to watch the children anymore. Not this weekend, not for the charity gala, not for the foreseeable future. Panic flashed across her face. Ruth, don't be dramatic. The gala is in 8 days. It's the biggest night of the year for my firm. We can't find someone we trust on such short notice. Not my problem, I said simply. What about the children? She countered, playing her strongest card. Don't you care how this will affect them? They rely on you. They need you. They need a grandmother who's respected by their parents, not treated like the help. This is completely unreasonable. Margaret's composure was fully cracking now. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? I repeated incredulously. What exactly have you done for me, Margaret? Given me cast-off clothes you were planning? To donate anyway? Let me eat leftovers from your dinner parties? Please enlighten me. Her face flushed with anger. We gave you a place in our family. We let you be part of the children's lives. Let me? They're my grandchildren. And they're our children. Our responsibility. We decide what's best for them, who should be around them. We stared at each other. The truth of our relationship finally laid bare between us. You should go, I said quietly. I think we both know where we stand now. Ruth, please. She tried one last time, her voice softening with calculated desperation. Think about Emma, Lucas, and Lily. Whatever issues you have with me, don't take it out on them. They'll be devastated if you suddenly disappear from their lives. I'm not disappearing, I said firmly. I'm just not going to be your free childcare anymore. I'm still their grandmother. I'll still see them, but on my terms, not whenever it's convenient for your career. Margaret's jaw tightened. James isn't going to be happy about this. James is a grown man. He can manage his own disappointment. I began to close the door. I'll call the children tomorrow to check in with them. This isn't over, Margaret warned, stepping back. You're right, I agreed. It's just beginning. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. In 15 years, I had never stood up to Margaret like that. The adrenaline made my hands shake, but beneath the tremors was something else. A steadiness, a certainty I hadn't felt in years. My phone immediately started ringing, James again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Text. Messages began pinging, one after another. Mom, call me back. We need to talk. Margaret said you're refusing to help with the kids. What's going on? This isn't like you, Mom. I'm worried. At least think about the kids. They'll be confused. If you just disappear. That last one stung. I would never abandon my grandchildren. But it was typical of James and Margaret to frame my actions in the most dramatic, guilt-inducing way possible. I turned my phone off and walked to the kitchen, where I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steadier now. I carried the tea back to my computer and reopened the webpage I'd been browsing. Luxury European river cruises. Last-minute departures. There was an opening on a 15-day cruise from Amsterdam to Budapest, departing in 6 days. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. I'd be gone for the charity gala and well beyond. The price was steep, especially for a solo traveler, but I had more than enough saved, and the suite available was one of the premium options with a private balcony and daily butler service. Before I could second-guess myself, I entered my credit card information and booked it. The confirmation email arrived moments later, followed by a list of recommended items to pack and optional excursions to consider. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. I was going to Europe, finally seeing the places Harold and I had dreamed of visiting together. I was choosing myself, my own happiness, over the demands of others. I went to bed that night with my phone still turned off, knowing James and Margaret were probably frantic trying to figure out their childcare plans for the gala and beyond. Part of me felt guilty, not for asserting my independence, but for the knowledge that the children might be confused by my sudden absence. I promised myself I'd call them the next day to explain as best I could. When I finally turned my phone, back on the next morning, there were 27 missed calls and 19 text messages. Most were from James, growing increasingly frantic. 3 were from Margaret, her tone shifting from conciliatory to accusatory. But the ones that made my heart clench were from Emma. "Grandma, are you mad at us? Mom and Dad are fighting and saying, 'You're not coming over anymore.' Grandma, please call me back, I'm scared." Did we do something wrong? I called Emma immediately, my heart in my throat. She answered on the first ring. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom and Dad said you're upset and might not come see us anymore." "Oh, Emma, that's not true at all," I assured her, anger flaring at James and Margaret for putting such fears in the children's heads. "I love you, Lucas, and Lily more than anything in the world. Nothing will ever change that." "Then why were Mom and Dad saying you won't help us anymore? Dad was yelling last night. He said you were being selfish." The accusations stung, even secondhand. "Emma, listen to me carefully. Your parents and I have had a disagreement about grown-up things that have nothing to do with you or your brother and sister. I'm going to take a little trip, something I've been wanting to do for a long time. But I'll be back, and nothing will change how much I love you." "A trip?" She sounded surprised. "Where are you going?" "Europe," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "I'm going to take a cruise down rivers that go through beautiful old cities. I've wanted to see these places since before you were born." "That sounds amazing." There was genuine wonder in her voice. "But you've never gone anywhere before. You're always here with us." Her innocent observation was like a knife to my heart. She had never known me as anything but her ever-present grandmother, the woman who was always available, always waiting in the wings of their lives. "That's true," I acknowledged. "But I think it's time for me to do some of the things I've been putting off. You're getting older now. You'll be a teenager soon. You don't need your old grandmother hovering around all the time." "I'll always need you," she said, with the fierce certainty of a 12-year-old. "But I think it's cool you're going on an adventure. Can I tell Lucas and Lily?" "Of course you can. And I promise I'll bring you all something special from my trip." "When are you leaving?" "In 6 days," I told her. "And I'll be gone for about 2 weeks. But I'll call whenever I can, and maybe we can do video calls so you can see some of the places I visit." "That would be awesome." Her enthusiasm warmed my heart. "Dad's calling me for breakfast. I have to go. But Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart, I'm glad you're doing something that makes you happy." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, gathering my courage. Then I called James. "Mom!" He sounded equal parts relieved and angry. "Where have you been? I've been calling all night." "I turned my phone off," I said calmly. "I needed time to think without interruptions." "You can't just disappear like that. We were worried sick." "I'm a 70-year-old woman, James, not a child. I don't need to account for my whereabouts to anyone. He sighed heavily. Look, I know you're upset about what you overheard. Margaret feels terrible. She didn't mean any of it. Yes, she did, I said quietly. And that's okay. It's clarified things for me. What do you mean? I mean, I've made some decisions about my life going forward. First, I'm going on a trip, a river cruise through Europe. I leave in 6 days. A cruise? He sounded genuinely shocked. Since when do you want to go on cruises? Since always, James. Since before you were born. Your father and I always planned to travel after retirement. Life had other plans, but now I'm finally doing it. But what about the kids? What about the charity gala? You'll have to find a babysitter, I said firmly. I've already booked the cruise. It's non-refundable. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just take off to Europe with no notice. What about your doctor's appointments, your book club, My what, James? My life? The one I've put on hold for 15 years while I helped raise your children? He fell silent. I don't. Have a book club, I continued, my voice softer but no less determined. I don't have hobbies or friends my own age or any of the things most women my age have because I've spent every waking hour either taking care of your children or recovering from taking care of your children. That's not fair, he protested. Weakly. You chose to help us. We never forced you. You're right, I agreed. I did choose it. Every day I chose your family over my own needs. And I don't regret those choices, James. I love Emma, Lucas, and Lily more than I can express. But now I'm making a different choice. I'm choosing myself for once. Mom, please, can we talk about this in person? Come over for dinner tonight. Margaret will apologize properly. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, I said. I'm going on this cruise. When I get back, we can discuss what my role in the children's lives will look like going forward. But I won't be your free childcare anymore. Is this about money? He asked for the second time. Because we can pay you, Mom. We've always said we would if you needed it. The assumption that financial need was the only reason I might want to change our arrangement grated on my nerves. This isn't about money, James. This is about respect. About recognizing that I have my own life, my own dreams. Of course you do, he said, but his tone was placating rather than understanding. No one's saying otherwise, aren't they? When was the last time you or Margaret asked me about my interests, my plans, my dreams? The silence on the other end of the line was telling. That's what I thought, I said softly. I've spoken with Emma this morning. I've assured her that this has nothing to do with my love for her or her siblings. I'd appreciate it if you and Margaret would reinforce that message rather than telling them I'm not helping anymore or that I'm being selfish. Mom, I never. Emma said you were yelling last night. She said you called me selfish. He had the grace to sound ashamed. I was upset. I didn't mean for her to hear that. But you said it, I pointed out. And you meant it. That's the problem, James. In your mind, me taking 2 weeks for myself after 15 years of constant availability is selfish. That tells me everything I need to know about how you view my role in your lives. That's not fair. Maybe not, I conceded. But it's honest. And right now, I need honesty more than I need fairness. So what happens now? He asked, sounding defeated. Now I prepare for my trip. I'll see the children before I leave, to say goodbye properly and assure them I'll be back. While I'm gone, you and Margaret will have to manage childcare yourselves. And when I return, we'll establish a new normal, one that includes time for me to pursue my own interests. And if we can't afford regular childcare, the question felt like a trap, designed to trigger my guilt. You and Margaret both have successful careers, James. The house you live in costs more than most people make in 5 years. You have options. It's not that simple. It is that simple, I interrupted. You've become accustomed to having free, high-quality childcare whenever you need it. That's changing. You'll adapt. just like families everywhere adapt to their circumstances. He was quiet for a long moment. I still think you're overreacting to one offhand comment. It wasn't just a comment, I said. It was a window into how Margaret really sees me, how both of you see me, and now I can't unsee it. Fine, he said finally, his tone clipped. Go on your cruise. We'll figure something out. But don't be surprised if this changes things, Mom. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities and expect everything to stay the same. My responsibilities? I repeated, incredulous. James, my responsibility to parent you ended when you turned 18. Everything I've done since then has been from love, not obligation. And as for things changing, I'm counting on it. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding but my resolve steady. The conversation had gone much as I'd expected. James, trying to guilt me, then to bribe me, and finally to threaten me with vague consequences. All tactics that had worked in the past to keep me in line, to keep me available whenever they needed me. But this time was different. This time, I had somewhere else to be. I spent the next few days in a flurry of activity, booking flights to Amsterdam, shopping for appropriate cruise wear, arranging for my mail to be held, and canceling the few standing appointments I had. I visited my doctor for a checkup and to refill my prescriptions, making sure I had enough medication for the trip. James called several more times, his tone alternating between contrition and frustration. Margaret sent a flower arrangement with an apology card, the same kind of arrangement she sent to colleagues after workplace disagreements. It felt impersonal, calculated, a gesture meant to smooth things over rather than address the underlying issue. Emma called every day, her excitement about my trip growing as she researched the cities I'd be visiting and suggested things I shouldn't miss. Lucas and Lily were less interested in the travel details but concerned about when they'd see me again. I promised all three that I'd bring them special souvenirs and that we'd have a proper visit when I returned. The day before my departure, I went to James and Margaret's house to say goodbye to the children. Margaret was coldly polite, maintaining a brittle smile while shooting daggers at me with her eyes. James was nowhere to be seen. Working late, Margaret explained tersely. Grandma, I made you this. Lily thrust a carefully folded piece of paper into my hands. Inside was a childish drawing of what appeared to be me on a boat, surrounded by stick figures labeled Lily, Lucas, and Emma. It's us with you on your boat, she explained earnestly. So you won't be lonely. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. I'll keep it with me every day, I promised. Lucas had made a card, too, filled with facts about the Danube River he'd researched online. Did you know it flows through 10 countries? That's more than any other river in the world. I didn't know. That, I said, genuinely impressed. You'll have to quiz me when I get back, see how many I remember visiting. Emma hung back, watching the interactions with the wisdom of a nearly teenage girl. When it was time for me to leave, she walked me to the door. Mom's really mad at you, she whispered. And Dad, too. They've been arguing a lot. I'm sorry about that, I said sincerely. But sometimes adults disagree, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anyone stops loving you or your brother and sister. She nodded solemnly. I know. But I heard Mom on the phone saying they can't afford a real nanny, and Dad saying they might have to cancel their summer vacation plans if they have to pay for childcare all the time. The revelation that my absence was forcing them to rethink their financial priorities was telling. They had become so accustomed to my free labor that they had built their lifestyle around it, never considering what would happen if that support disappeared. They'll figure it out, I assured her. Your parents are smart, capable people. Emma looked unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. Instead, she gave me a fierce hug. Have the best time, Grandma. Take lots of pictures. I promised I would, then slipped out the door before Margaret could corner me for another stilted conversation about my responsibilities to the family. That night, I finished packing my new suitcase, a luxury I'd never allowed myself before, always making do with the battered old one Harold and I had used for weekend trips decades ago. As I carefully placed Lily's drawing in a protective folder, my phone chimed with a text from James. "Have a safe trip, Mom. We'll talk when you get back." The message was terse but not hostile, a small olive branch, or perhaps just an acknowledgement that my mind was made up and further argument was pointless. Replied with a simple, "Thank you. I love you." Whether he believed that right now or not, it was true. This boundary I was setting wasn't about punishing James or even Margaret. It was about finally recognizing my own worth, my own right to a life beyond serving their needs as... I drifted off to sleep that night. I thought about Harold and what he would say if he could see me now. I could almost hear his voice, warm with approval. "It's about time, Ruthie. It's about time." The Amsterdam airport buzzed with activity as I stepped off the plane, clutching my carry-on bag with nervous excitement. After a lifetime of dreaming about European travel, I was finally here. The reality of what I was doing hit me anew. I, Ruth Bennett, 70 years old and never before traveled outside of North America, was embarking on a luxury river cruise through the heart of Europe. Alone. For a moment, anxiety threatened to overtake me. What was I thinking? I didn't speak any foreign languages. I had no traveling companion. I was a grandmother from Boston who had spent the last 15 years driving carpools and making mac and cheese. Not a sophisticated world traveler. Then, I remembered Margaret's voice, casual and cutting. "She's just a glorified babysitter." The memory straightened my spine. I might be out of my comfort zone, but I wasn't helpless. I'd raised a son, helped raise 3 grandchildren, and managed a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio without anyone's guidance. I could certainly find my way to a cruise ship. Following the signs to ground transportation, I located the luxury car service the cruise line had arranged. A uniformed driver held a sign with my name on it, Mrs. Bennett, and greeted me with a professional smile. "First time in Amsterdam?" he asked, as he stored my luggage in the trunk of a sleek, black Mercedes. "First time in Europe," I admitted. "Ah, then you are in for a treat. Amsterdam is a beautiful city to begin your European adventure." As we drove from the airport toward the cruise terminal, I gazed out the window at the unfamiliar scenery. Narrow, houses with distinctive gabled facades lined picturesque canals. Bicycles were everywhere, locked to bridges, parked in massive racks, zipping past cars with confident riders who seemed immune to the damp spring weather. "Your ship is one of the finest on the rivers," the driver told me. "The Danube Princess. Very exclusive." I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with guilt. The cruise had cost more than I'd ever spent on myself at once, nearly $15,000 for the premium suite with the private balcony. But I had the money, and after 15 years of putting everyone else first, wasn't it finally my turn to experience a bit of luxury? When we arrived at the cruise terminal, porters immediately took charge of my luggage. I was escorted to a private lounge where champagne and pastries awaited embarking premium passengers. The staff greeted me by name and handed me a glass of champagne. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Bennett. We're delighted to have you join us." The glass felt foreign in my hand. When was the last time I'd been served champagne? My 70th birthday, perhaps, when James and Margaret had taken me to dinner at that upscale restaurant in Boston. Margaret had ordered the cheapest bottle on the menu while making a show of treating me to something special. This champagne was exquisite, crisp, and bright on my tongue. I took another sip, feeling the tension of the past week begin to melt away. A young woman in a crisp uniform approached, with a tablet. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Sophia, your personal concierge for the journey. I'd like to review your suite amenities and excursion preferences if you have a moment." I followed her to a quiet corner where she efficiently explained the ship's layout, the dining options, the included shore excursions, and the premium experiences available for an additional fee. Without really planning to, I found myself upgrading my experience even further, adding a private tour of Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, a classical music concert in Budapest, a wine tasting in the Wachau Valley. "And would you like to reserve any spa treatments during your cruise?" Sophia asked, tapping her tablet. "The thermal suite is complimentary with your premium room category, but our massage and facial treatments are quite popular and tend to book quickly." I hesitated. I'd never had a professional massage in my life. Such luxuries had always seemed frivolous, unnecessary, an indulgence I couldn't justify. "I highly recommend the Riverstone massage after your day in Vienna," Sophia suggested. "The walking tour, while wonderful, can be quite taxing." "All right," I heard myself say. "I'll try that one." By the time we finished, I had scheduled a massage, a facial, and something called a hydrating body wrap that sounded both terrifying and wonderful. The additional charges would add another $800 to my already extravagant trip, but the number barely registered. What was $800 when my net worth was over $2 million? That thought stopped me cold. In all my years of careful investing, of watching Harold's portfolio grow under my stewardship, I had never truly internalized what that money meant. It wasn't just security for my old age or a legacy for my grandchildren. It was freedom, the freedom to experience life on my own terms. After completing my registration, I was escorted to my suite. The room was more luxurious than any hotel I'd ever stayed in. A queen-sized bed with premium linens, a sitting area with a small sofa and armchair, a marble bathroom with a full-sized tub, and, most impressively, a private balcony overlooking the water. "Your butler, Anton, will be with you shortly to introduce himself," the staff member told me, placing my carry-on carefully on a luggage rack. "He'll unpack for you if you wish." A butler? Someone to unpack my clothes? The idea was so foreign. I almost laughed. But when Anton knocked on my door a few minutes later, his dignified manner and professional demeanor put me at ease. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Bennett. May I offer you a refreshment while we discuss your preferences for your stay?" Anton was perhaps 50, with salt and pepper hair and the posture of a dancer. His accent was Eastern European. "Czech," he told me. When I asked, and he had been working on river cruises for more than 20 years. "This is my first cruise," I admitted, as he poured me a glass of sparkling water with a perfect curl of lemon peel. "I'm not entirely sure what to expect." "Then it is my privilege to ensure your first experience exceeds all expectations," he said with a small bow. "Would you like me to unpack your luggage now, or would you prefer to rest first?" The idea of someone else handling my underwear and arranging my toiletries made me uncomfortable. "I can unpack myself," I said. "But thank you." "As you wish. Simply press this button if you need anything at all." He indicated a discreet call button near the bed. "I am at your service 24 hours a day." After Anton left, I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding me. The contrast between this suite and my Spartan condo was stark. Here, every detail had been considered for my comfort. The perfect firmness of the mattress, the plush towels, the carefully curated selection of toiletries, the fresh flowers in a crystal vase. When was the last time someone had considered my comfort a priority? Even in James and Margaret's home, where I spent so much of my time, I had never truly had a space of my own. I perched on the edge of their lives, useful but ultimately peripheral. I unpacked my new clothes, simple but elegant. Pieces I'd purchased for the trip, more than I'd spent on myself in years, and arranged my toiletries in the spacious bathroom. Then I stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the unfamiliar sense of a foreign harbor. My phone chimed with a text message. "Emma. Did you make it to the boat? What's it like?" I smiled and took a photo of the view from my balcony, sending it to her with the caption, "Made it safely." "The ship is beautiful. My room has its own balcony." She responded immediately with wide-eyed emojis and, "So cool." Mom and Dad are fighting again about who's going to watch us for the gala. Aunt Shelley said she might come, but she wants to get paid this time. I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by resolve. It wasn't my responsibility to solve their childcare issues. They were adults with resources. They would figure it out. "I'm sorry they're arguing," I texted back. "But I'm sure they'll work it out." "How are Lucas and Lily?" "They're fine. Lucas is mad because Dad said we might have to skip his baseball tournament this weekend if they can't. Find someone to take him." Another pang of guilt. In the past, I would have been the one to take Lucas to his tournament while James and Margaret attended whatever social or work event conflicted with it. Had I been unfair to the children, punishing them for their parents' attitudes? No, I decided. The children would adjust. And perhaps this was an important lesson for them too, that their grandmother was a person with her own life and interests, not just an extension of their parents' household management system. "I'm sure they'll find a solution," I texted Emma. "I'll call you tomorrow after our first stop in Cologne." I put my phone away and tried to push thoughts of home from my mind. This was my time, my adventure. I would not let guilt or worry erode this experience I had waited a lifetime to have. That evening, I dressed for dinner in a new outfit. Black, slacks and a silk blouse in a deep teal that brought out the blue in my eyes. I even applied makeup, something I rarely bothered with for everyday childcare duties. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Without the constant stress and exhaustion of caring for 3 active children, my face looked years younger. My silver hair, freshly styled before the trip, framed my face in soft waves instead of the practical ponytail I usually wore. In the dining room, I was escorted to a table for 2 by a window. "Are you expecting a companion?" the maitre d' asked. "No," I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I'm traveling alone." "Ah, a solo adventurer. How wonderful." He pulled out my chair with a flourish. "Please enjoy your evening." The menu offered choices I'd never encountered before. Foie gras, escargot, beef Wellington. I ordered conservatively for my first night, sticking to a simple salad and grilled fish, but the flavors were extraordinary. The wine pairing suggested by the sommelier complemented each course perfectly. As I was finishing my dessert, a decadent chocolate soufflé, a distinguished-looking gentleman approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight British accent. "I couldn't help noticing you're dining alone. I'm in the same situation myself. I wonder if you might join me for coffee in the lounge. Always nicer to watch the evening scenery with company, I find." He was tall and lean, perhaps in his mid-70s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. His manner was polite, not presumptuous, but I still felt a flutter of alarm. I hadn't dated since Harold died. The idea of male companionship was as foreign to me now as the European landscape outside the window. "Thank you, but I'm rather tired from traveling," I said, more curtly than I'd intended. "Perhaps another evening." He accepted the refusal gracefully. "Of course. Travel fatigue is quite real. My name is Edward Campbell, by the way. I'm in Suite 310 if you change your mind about that coffee." After he left, I chided myself for being so abrupt. What was I afraid of? A coffee and conversation with a fellow traveler wasn't a marriage proposal. I had jumped to conclusions, assuming romantic interest where there might have been only friendly overture. Back in my suite, I found the bed turned down, a chocolate on the pillow, and a card detailing the next day's itinerary. I stepped onto the balcony one last time before bed, watching the lights of Amsterdam slide by as the ship began its journey down the Rhine. The air was cool and damp against my skin, carrying unfamiliar scents, water and diesel and the earthy smell of the countryside beyond the city. I thought about texting James to let him know I'd arrived safely, but decided against it. He hadn't texted me again after that brief message the night before. Perhaps he was still angry, or perhaps he was simply respecting my desire for space. Either way, I found I didn't need his acknowledgement or approval to enjoy this moment. For the first time in decades, I was answerable to no one but myself. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I slept better that night than I had in years, rocked by the gentle motion of the ship and wrapped in luxurious sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. No grandchildren would wake me at dawn. No school lunches needed packing. No soccer uniforms required washing. Just me, the river, and the European adventure I'd waited a lifetime to experience. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of my condo. Then memory returned, and with it, a surge of joy. I was on a river cruise in Europe. I was free. I dressed in comfortable clothes for the day's excursion to Cologne, Germany. The itinerary promised a walking tour of the old town and a visit to the famous cathedral. I was nervous about keeping up with the group. At 70, my knees weren't what they used to be. But the cruise materials had assured me the pace would be gentle, with plenty of opportunities to rest. At breakfast, I chose a table by the window. Again, but this time I was less self-conscious about dining alone. The food was excellent: freshly baked pastries, eggs prepared to order, local cheeses and fruits arranged artfully on platters. I was spreading butter on a still warm croissant when Edward, the gentleman from the previous evening, approached my table. "Good morning," he said with a friendly smile. "I hope you slept well?" "Very well, thank you," I replied, more warmly than our previous interaction. "Would you like to join me?" The invitation surprised me as much as him, but it felt right somehow. "I'd be delighted." He settled into the chair across from me, signaling to a waiter for coffee. "Edward Campbell," he reminded me, extending his hand. "Ruth Bennett," I said, shaking it. "American?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "East Coast, I'm guessing." "Boston?" I laughed. "Is my accent that obvious?" "I spent several years teaching at Harvard," he explained. "One develops an ear for the regional nuances." "You're a professor?" "Retired now, but yes. Art history." His eyes lit up with genuine passion, which is why this cruise is such a delight. So many magnificent artworks and architectural wonders along our route. We chatted easily through breakfast, discovering we shared not only a love of art, but a similar situation. Both widowed, both with adult children and grandchildren, both on our first European river cruise. Edward was British, but had lived in several countries throughout his career. Now retired, he split his time between London and a small cottage in the Cotswolds. "And what about you?" he asked as we finished our coffee. "What brings Ruth Bennett to a luxury river cruise through Europe?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this charming stranger. "A long-delayed dream," I said finally. "My husband and I always planned to travel after retirement, but he passed away before we could." "I'm sorry for your loss," Edward said, his expression genuinely sympathetic. "It was a long time ago," I said. "Almost 20 years now. But this trip, it feels like I'm fulfilling a promise to him in a way." "And to yourself," Edward suggested. "Yes," I agreed, surprised by his insight. "Definitely to myself." We parted ways as the ship docked in Cologne, each joining different tour groups. Mine was led by a cheerful German woman named Greta, who shepherded our small group of 12 through the cobblestone streets of the old town with practiced ease. When my pace slowed climbing the steep steps to the cathedral, she adjusted the group's tempo without drawing attention to my limitations, a kindness I appreciated deeply. The cathedral itself was breathtaking: soaring Gothic spires, intricate, stained glass windows, the famous shrine of the Three Kings with its gleaming gold. I found myself wishing I could share the experience with Harold, who had loved history and architecture. He would have been fascinated by Greta's explanation of the cathedral's construction, which had taken over 600 years to complete. I thought briefly of James and the children, too. How Emma would have loved the stained glass, how Lucas would have been impressed by the sheer size of the building, how Lily would have asked a million questions about the medieval craftsman who built it. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness that I couldn't share this with them. But then I remembered why I was here alone. I remembered Margaret's dismissive tone, glorified babysitter, and James's accusation of selfishness. I remembered 15. Years of putting their needs first, of being taken for granted, of having my time and energy treated as an infinite resource they could draw upon without consideration. No, I decided as I gazed up at the vaulted ceiling of the cathedral. I needed, this time for myself, I needed to remember who Ruth Bennett was beyond her roles as mother and grandmother. I needed to reclaim the dreams I'd set aside for so long. After the tour, I wandered through a Christmas market that operated year-round in Cologne, selling handcrafted ornaments and traditional German treats. I bought small gifts for each of my grandchildren, a delicate blown glass ornament for Emma, a hand-carved wooden train for Lucas, and a plush gingerbread man for Lily. I even found a beautiful hand-woven scarf in shades of blue and green that reminded me of Margaret's eyes. A peace offering, perhaps, for when I returned. Back on the ship that afternoon, I retreated to my suite for a short nap before dinner. The walking tour had tired me more than I wanted to admit, my knees protesting the uneven cobblestones and cathedral stairs. I awoke to a gentle knock at my door. Anton, my butler, with a silver tray bearing tea and small pastries. "I thought you might enjoy a light refreshment before dinner," he said, setting the tray on the coffee table in my sitting area. Today's excursion was quite extensive. "Thank you, Anton," I said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very kind." "It is my pleasure, Mrs. Bennett. Will you be dining in the restaurant this evening, or would you prefer to have dinner served here in your suite?" The idea of a private dinner on my balcony was tempting, especially given my fatigue, but I was also conscious of my tendency to isolate myself. Part of this journey was about expanding my horizons, not retreating into solitude. "I'll come to the restaurant," I decided, though perhaps a bit earlier than the main seating, if possible. "Of course. I'll arrange for your preferred table at 6:30. After Anton left, I sipped the fragrant tea, some kind of herbal blend with honey and lemon, and nibbled on a pastry while checking my phone. No messages from James, but Emma had texted again. "Aunt Shelley is staying with us for the weekend. Mom and Dad are paying her $300. She's taking Lucas to his baseball tournament. Can you believe they're paying her?" I smiled wryly. $300 for a weekend of childcare was actually quite reasonable, less than what they would have paid a professional nanny. The fact that Emma found it shocking revealed how accustomed the family had become to my free services. "That sounds like a good solution," I texted back. "How are you doing?" "Okay, I guess. Dad's still mad, though. I heard him telling Mom that you're being ridiculous and selfish." The words stung, even secondhand. After 15 years of sacrifice, taking 2 weeks for myself was ridiculous and selfish, in my son's eyes. The judgment confirmed what I had begun to suspect, that James had come to see my devotion not as a gift freely given, but as an obligation, a role I was expected to fulfill without complaint or consideration for my own needs. "Don't worry about that," I texted Emma. "Your dad's just frustrated because he has to make new arrangements. He'll get over it." I sent her a photo of the Cologne cathedral and the Christmas market, then added one of the gifts I'd bought for the children. "Look what I found for you three. I'll bring them home with me." Emma responded with a row of heart emojis. "Lucas will love that train. When are you going to Budapest? That's the place I really want to see." "Not for about 10 days, I told her. "I'll send lots of pictures when we get there." I put my phone away and changed for dinner, choosing another new outfit. Gray slacks, and a lavender blouse that brought out the silver in my hair. I added a simple pearl necklace and earrings, a gift from Harold on our 25th anniversary. In the dining room, I was shown to the same table as the previous night. I had just ordered a glass of wine when Edward appeared beside me. "Good. Evening, Ruth," he said. "Would you mind if I joined you? Or are you still recovering from today's adventures?" This time I didn't hesitate. "Please, join me. How did you enjoy Cologne?" "Marvelous architecture," he said, settling into the chair across from me. Though I must admit, my knees protested rather strongly at all those cathedral steps. I laughed, relieved to hear I wasn't the only one feeling the effects of the day's exertions. "Mine too. I was just thinking I'm perhaps not as young as I used to be." "Nonsense," Edward said with a twinkle in his eye. "Age is merely a number. It's enthusiasm that counts, and you seem to have that in abundance." The dinner that followed was one of the most enjoyable evenings I'd spent in years. Edward was charming, intelligent, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. We discovered a shared love of literature, classical music, and gardening. He told me about his late wife, Margaret, a different Margaret, thank goodness, who had been a concert pianist until arthritis forced her to retire. I shared stories about Harold and his passion for photography, a hobby he'd never had enough time to properly pursue during his working years. "And what about you, Ruth?" Edward asked as we lingered over dessert and coffee. "What are your passions?" The question caught me off guard. What were my passions? After 15 years of fitting my life around my grandchildren's schedules, I wasn't sure I remembered. "I used to love cooking," I said hesitantly. "Not just everyday meals, but really exploring different cuisines, trying complicated recipes, and gardening. We had quite a large vegetable garden when we lived in Vermont." "Used to?" Edward prompted gently. I sighed. "Life got in the way, I suppose. After Harold died, I moved to a condo to be closer to my son and his family. No room for a proper garden there, and cooking elaborate meals for one seemed pointless. And now? What would you like to pursue now that you're having this grand adventure?" I considered the question seriously. "I'd like to travel more, I think. Not just this trip, but others. There's so much of the world I haven't seen. And maybe take some cooking classes, reconnect with that old passion." "Both excellent ambitions," Edward approved. "Life is too short to postpone joy, don't you think?" We parted ways after dinner, Edward walking me to my suite with old-fashioned courtesy. At my door, he took my hand and pressed it briefly. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Ruth. I hope we can dine together again tomorrow." "I'd like that," I said, surprised to realize how much I meant it. Inside my suite, I found another turn-down service had been completed. Fresh towels in the bathroom, the bed prepared with the covers folded back invitingly, another chocolate on the pillow. But there was something new on the desk, a printed statement of my onboard account. I picked it up, curious to see how my additional excursions and spa treatments were reflected in the total. The figure at the bottom of the page made me gasp. 48.73. I mentally converted euros to dollars, nearly $5,500, and we were only 2 days into the trip. For a moment, old habits reasserted themselves. That was an extravagant sum. I should cancel the spa treatments, skip the premium excursions, watch my spending more carefully. Then I remembered the balance in my investment accounts, $2.3 million. Even if I spent $10,000 on this trip, which seemed likely given my current pace, it would barely make a dent in my overall net worth. And wasn't this exactly what money was for? To enhance life, to create experiences, to bring joy. I set the statement aside without anxiety. For once in my life, I would not count pennies or worry about being a burden. I had earned this luxury through decades of hard work and careful management. I deserved to enjoy it. Before bed, I stepped onto my balcony one last time. The ship was moving slowly through the night, the banks of the Rhine visible as dark shapes against the starlit sky. In the distance, I could see the lights of a small town, probably not even named in tourist guidebooks, but beautiful in its quiet existence. I thought about the conversation with Edward, about passions and pursuits, and not postponing joy. For too long, I had put my own joy last, convinced that my role was to facilitate others' happiness at the expense of my own. I had allowed James and Margaret to define my value in terms of my usefulness to them, to reduce my contribution to a financial calculation, free childcare versus paid help. But I was more than a babysitter, more than a grandmother, more than a widow. I was Ruth Bennett, a woman with dreams and desires of her own, with the means to fulfill them and the time, finally, to pursue them. I sent a quick text to Emma before bed. Having a wonderful time. Made a new friend at dinner. The ship sails all night, and tomorrow we'll be in a new country. Sweet dreams, sweetheart. Her response came almost immediately. A friend? Like a boyfriend? OMG, Grandma. I laughed out loud. Trust a 12-year-old. To jump to romantic conclusions. Just a friend, I texted back, a retired professor from England. Very nice gentleman. Sure, Grandma, just a friend. Have fun with your friend. I put my phone away, still smiling. Let Emma have her romantic fantasies. I was just grateful for the company of someone who saw me as a person in my own right, not as an extension of their household management system. That night, I dreamed of Harold. We were walking through a European city, perhaps Vienna or Budapest, though I'd never seen either in real life. He was smiling, pointing out architectural details I might have missed, his face alight with the joy of discovery. See, Ruthie? He said in the dream. I told you we'd get here someday. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a surprising lightness in my heart. It wasn't grief I felt, but gratitude, for the years we'd had together, for the lessons he'd taught, me for the security he'd ensured through his careful financial planning, and perhaps most of all, for the sense that he would have approved of this journey, this reclamation of myself. I dressed for the day's excursion with a new confidence, choosing comfortable clothes, but adding a colorful scarf I'd purchased in Cologne. Today we would visit Koblenz, where the Rhine and Moselle rivers meet, and tour a medieval castle perched high on a hill overlooking the water. The cruise director had warned us the walk would be strenuous, but buses were available for those who preferred not to climb. At breakfast, Edward was already seated at a table by the window. He waved when he saw me, and I joined him without hesitation. Good morning, Ruth, he said, rising slightly as I approached. Sleep well? Very well, I said, not mentioning the dream of Harold. Though I'm a bit nervous about today's castle tour. I understand the climb is challenging. Ah, yes, I've decided. To take the bus option, I'm afraid. My knees made their opinion of yesterday's cathedral steps quite clear. I laughed, relieved. I was thinking the same thing. We can be sensible together. As we chatted over breakfast, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. James. I hesitated, then excused myself to answer it in a quiet corner of the dining room. Hello, James, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Mom, he said, his voice tight with what sounded like controlled anger. We need to talk about this little vacation of yours. I'm listening, I said, though his tone already had my defenses rising. Aunt Shelley is charging us $300. For the weekend, he said without preamble. $300. That's more than our car payment. That seems reasonable for 3 days of childcare for 3 children, I observed, keeping my voice calm. Professional nannies would charge much more. That's not the point. James's voice rose. Then he seemed to catch himself. Look, Mom, this isn't sustainable. Margaret and I built our lives around the understanding that you would help with the kids. We can't suddenly afford full-time childcare on top of our mortgage and the kids' activities. I never agreed to provide free, unlimited childcare for 15 years, James. That was your assumption, not my commitment. So what are you saying? That when you get back, you're just done? You won't help with the kids anymore? I sighed. No, that's not what I'm saying. I love Emma, Lucas, and Lily, and I want to be part of their lives, but on different terms. I need time for myself, for my own interests. I'm thinking maybe 2 days a week on a regular schedule that we all agree to in advance. 2 days? He sounded incredulous. Mom, we need you at least 4 days, plus evenings when we have events. And what about school vacations? That's exactly what I'm talking about, James. You've come to see my time as something you're entitled to, not something I'm choosing to give. That has to change. This is crazy, he muttered. Absolutely crazy. What's gotten into you? Is this some kind of, midlife crisis? I almost laughed at the absurdity of that. I'm 70, James. I'm well past midlife. This isn't a crisis. It's a correction. I've allowed an unhealthy pattern to develop, and now I'm addressing it. By running off to Europe and leaving us in the lurch. By taking 2 weeks for myself after 15 years of being available whenever you needed me, I countered. And you're hardly in the lurch. You and Margaret have good jobs. You're intelligent, capable adults. You're figuring it out, just like millions of other parents do. At considerable expense, he grumbled. Yes, childcare costs money, I agreed. That's a reality most parents face. You've been fortunate to avoid it for the past 15 years. Because you offered to help. His frustration was palpable now. You said you wanted to be involved in the kids' lives. And I do, I said. But being involved doesn't mean being at your beck and call. It doesn't mean giving up my own life to facilitate yours. So that's how you see it? That we've been taking advantage of you all these years? The hurt in his voice was real, and for a moment, I softened. No, James. I chose to help because I love you and the children. But somewhere along the way, my choice became your expectation, and that's what needs to change. Fine, he said after a long pause. We'll talk about this when you get back. In the meantime, I hope you're enjoying spending all this money on yourself while we're scrambling to cover basic childcare. The comment was a direct hit, designed to trigger my guilt. In the past, it would have worked. But something had shifted in me, a fundamental recalibration of my sense of what I deserved, what I was worth. Actually, I am enjoying it, I said, with newfound confidence. For the first time in decades, I'm putting myself first. It's long overdue. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve intact. I returned to the table where Edward waited, concern evident in his expression. Everything all right? He asked. You look a bit shaken. Family drama, I said, attempting a smile. Nothing serious. Edward studied me for a moment, then nodded. Family can be complicated. My son hasn't spoken to me in 3 years because I remarried after his mother died. He considers it a betrayal, though Margaret had been gone for nearly a decade by then. I'm sorry, I said, genuinely moved by his openness. That must be painful. It is, he acknowledged. But I've come to accept that I can't control his feelings or reactions. I can only live my life authentically and hope that someday he'll understand. His words resonated deeply with me. Wasn't that exactly what I was trying to do now? Live authentically? Honor my own needs and desires, even if it disappointed those who had become accustomed to my self-sacrifice? Thank you for sharing that, I said. It helps, somehow. He covered my hand briefly with his own, a gesture of solidarity rather than romance. We're all just doing our best, Ruth. Even when our best looks different than others might prefer. The wisdom of his words stayed with me throughout the day as we toured Koblenz and the magnificent Marksburg Castle. Taking the bus up the steep hillside was indeed the right choice. Even from the parking area, there were numerous steps and inclines to navigate through the medieval fortress. As we stood on the castle battlements, gazing out over the confluence of the Rhine and Moselle rivers, I thought about the confluence of circumstances that had brought me to this moment. Harold's careful financial planning, James and Margaret's thoughtless words, my own long-delayed decision to prioritize my happiness. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, truly present in my own life, not as a supporting character in someone else's story, but as the protagonist in my own. That evening, as Edward and I shared another delightful dinner, he raised his wine glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes warm with understanding, "and to the courage it takes to pursue them." "To new beginnings," I echoed, touching my glass to his. Part 3. The Hidden Asset Revelation. Continued, I had no idea where this journey would lead. Not just the physical journey through Europe, but the more profound journey of reclaiming myself. But for perhaps the first time in decades, I was excited to find out. Later that night, back in my suite, I found myself looking again at the statement of my onboard account. The number that had momentarily shocked me earlier now seemed almost inconsequential when viewed in the broader context of my financial situation. $2 million. It still didn't feel real somehow. I opened my tablet and logged into my investment portfolio. The numbers were right there in black and white. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, carefully diversified just as Harold had taught me. Over the years, I'd developed my own system for tracking the market, reading financial newsletters, and making strategic adjustments to maximize returns while minimizing risk. It occurred to me suddenly that James had no idea about any of this. He assumed I was living on Social Security and whatever small pension Harold had left me. He had never bothered to ask about my finances, had never expressed concern about my long-term security. It was simply assumed that I would continue providing free childcare indefinitely, because I had no other options, no other purpose. What would he say if he knew? If he understood that his mother wasn't a financial burden to be managed, but a woman of means who had chosen to give her time and energy, out of love rather than necessity. I pulled up my email and found the latest statements from the children's college funds I'd established. Emma's account now held just over $75,000, while the twins each had about $60,000. By the time they were ready for college, assuming modest continued growth, there would be enough to cover a significant portion of their education expenses. James and Margaret didn't know about these accounts either. I had planned to reveal them when the children were ready for college, a surprise gift, a legacy of love from their grandmother. But now I wondered if I should tell them sooner, let them know that I had been contributing to their future all along, not just with my time, but with my carefully managed resources. No, I decided. Not yet. This trip was about establishing new boundaries, about reclaiming my own identity. Revealing my financial situation now might feel like justifying my decision, proving I had the right to take this time for myself. And I didn't need to prove anything. My worth wasn't measured by my bank balance or my usefulness to others. I closed the financial apps and instead opened the photo album on my tablet, scrolling through pictures of Emma, Lucas, and Lily from over the years. Emma losing her first tooth. Lucas taking his first steps. Lily in her ballet costume for her first recital. So many precious moments, so much love. I didn't regret a single minute I'd spent with them, but I also didn't regret this decision to step back, to create space for myself in my own life. They would understand someday, I hoped. Perhaps when they were adults with families of their own, they would look back and recognize that their grandmother had been teaching them an important lesson about self-respect and healthy boundaries. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. "Ruth, This is Edward. Hope you don't mind, but I asked Sophia for your number. Sleep well, and I'll see you at breakfast. Looking forward to Strasbourg tomorrow." I smiled, oddly touched by the simple courtesy. Edward had quickly become an unexpected highlight of this journey. A companion who saw me as a person of substance and interest, not as an extension of someone else's needs. "Not at all," I texted back. "Good night, Edward. See you at breakfast." I added his number to my contacts, then set my phone aside and prepared for bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized I hadn't thought about James's angry call for hours. The guilt he'd tried to instill had faded, replaced by a growing sense of liberation. The next 5 days passed in a blur of new experiences and quiet revelations. Strasbourg, with its half-timbered houses and magnificent cathedral. Speyer and its Romanesque architecture. Heidelberg Castle perched dramatically above the Neckar River. Each day brought new wonders, new discoveries, not just about European history and culture, but about myself. I discovered I loved German wines, particularly the crisp Rieslings from the Rhine Valley. I learned that my knees, while not as resilient as they once were, could still manage reasonable amounts of walking if I paced myself and used the walking stick Edward had thoughtfully purchased for me in a shop in Heidelberg. I found that I enjoyed the rhythm of shipboard life. Breakfast with Edward, morning excursions, lunch back on board, afternoon relaxation in my suite or on the sun deck, dinner with stimulating conversation, and occasionally an evening concert or lecture. Also discovered that I had more stamina than I'd given myself credit for. Years of chasing after active grandchildren had kept me relatively fit, and after the initial adjustment period, I found myself less fatigued by the daily excursions. The massage I'd booked in Vienna was still welcome, but more as a luxury than a necessity. Edward and I had fallen into an easy companionship, dining together each evening and often joining the same excursion groups during the day. He was knowledgeable about art and architecture, enhancing my appreciation of the magnificent buildings and collections we visited. I found myself sharing stories and observations I wouldn't have voiced to a casual acquaintance, and he did the same. "You know," he said one evening as we lingered over dessert in the dining room, "I've been on several cruises since Margaret died, but I've never enjoyed one as much as this. I think it's the company." The compliment warmed me. "I've been thinking the same thing. I'm so glad we met." "Will you keep in touch after the cruise ends?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "I'd very much like to." "I'd like that too," I said, realizing I meant it sincerely. We were approaching our arrival in Vienna, the city where Harold and I had most wanted to visit together. The evening before we docked, I found myself feeling melancholy despite the anticipation. I stood on my balcony, watching the Austrian countryside slip by in the gathering dusk, thinking of Harold and all the plans we'd made together. A knock at my door roused me from my thoughts. It was Anton, my butler, with a silver tray bearing a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Mr. Campbell sends his compliments," Anton said with a small bow. "He wondered if you might join him for a toast on the upper deck. The sunset over the Wachau Valley is particularly beautiful this evening." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Please tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes." I found Edward at the bow of the ship, watching the sun sink toward the hills in a blaze of orange and gold. The upper deck was nearly deserted, most passengers already dressing for dinner or enjoying pre-dinner drinks in the lounge. "Ah, Ruth," Edward said, turning with a warm smile. "I hoped you'd come. This view is too magnificent to enjoy alone." Anton had followed me with the champagne and glasses, setting them on a small table between 2 deck chairs before discreetly withdrawing. Edward poured the golden liquid, handing me a flute with a slight flourish. "To unexpected pleasures," he said, raising his glass, "and to absent friends who would be glad to see us embracing life." The toast brought tears to my eyes. "How did—" "You know I was thinking of Harold." Edward's expression softened. "Because I was thinking of Margaret. Tomorrow we'll be in Vienna, a city she always wanted to visit but never did. I find myself wishing she could see it through my eyes, even as I'm grateful for the chance to see it through my own. Exactly, I whispered, touched by his understanding. Harold loved Mozart, Strauss, all the great Viennese composers. He would have been so excited for tomorrow's concert. We sat in companionable silence as the last rays of sunlight gilded the vineyard sloping down to the river. The champagne was perfect, dry and crisp with tiny bubbles that danced on my tongue. "You know," Edward said after a while, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about your son and his family, about how they've come to take your time and energy for granted." I tensed slightly, not sure I wanted to revisit that painful topic in this peaceful moment. "I hope I'm not overstepping," he continued, noticing my reaction. "But I wondered, have you told them about your financial situation? About the investments your husband left you?" The question startled me. "No," I admitted. "It never seemed relevant. And lately, I've been wondering if revealing it would somehow cheapen this stand I'm taking. As if I need to prove I have the means to be independent before I have the right to be." Edward nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that concern. But from an outside perspective, I wonder if perhaps they should know. Not as a justification for your choices, those require no justification, but as a correction to what seems a fundamental misunderstanding about who you are and what you're capable of." I considered his words, watching the last glow of sunset fade from the hills. "Perhaps you're right. I've been thinking about it myself. They see me as dependent, vulnerable, in need of their support, which in practice means access to their children in exchange for free childcare." I sighed. "It's not a healthy dynamic." "No," Edward agreed. "It's not. And sometimes a dramatic revelation can reset a relationship that's fallen into unhealthy patterns." He smiled wryly. "Though I'm hardly one to give advice on family relationships, given the state of things with my own son. Have you tried reaching out to him recently?" I asked gently. Edward's smile faded. "Every birthday, every Christmas. He returns my cards unopened, my gifts unsent. His children, my grandchildren, don't even know me." The sadness in his voice touched me deeply. "I'm so sorry, Edward." Shrugged, attempting lightness. "Life is full of imperfect outcomes, but also unexpected joys." He raised his glass again. "Like meeting a fascinating American woman on a river cruise." The compliment brought heat to my cheeks. Hardly fascinating. Just an ordinary grandmother who finally decided to stand up for herself. "There's nothing ordinary about you, Ruth Bennett," Edward said with such sincerity that I couldn't dismiss the words. "You raised a son alone after losing your husband. You've managed a substantial investment portfolio with skill that would impress professional financial advisors. You've devoted 15 years to helping raise 3 grandchildren. And now, at 70, you're embarking on new adventures with courage and grace. That's extraordinary by any measure." His words moved me more than I could express. When was the last time someone had seen me so clearly, had recognized the strength and capability beneath my unassuming exterior? Not James, certainly. Not Margaret. Perhaps not even Harold, who had loved me dearly but had often treated me as someone to be protected rather than someone to be admired. "Thank you," I said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions his perspective had stirred. We finished our champagne as the last light faded from the sky, stars emerging in the clear Austrian night. When we parted at my cabin door, Edward kissed my cheek lightly, a gesture of affection without presumption. "Sleep well, Ruth. Tomorrow, Vienna awaits." Vienna exceeded all expectations. The ornate imperial palaces, the magnificent churches, the wide boulevards lined with elegant buildings. It was like stepping into another era, a world of waltzes and emperors and artistic brilliance. Our guided tour took us through the historic center, past the Opera House and St. Stephen's Cathedral, through the Hofburg Palace complex with its Spanish riding school and imperial apartments. In the afternoon, I had booked the optional excursion to Schönbrunn Palace, the summer residence of the Habsburg emperors. Edward joined me, his knowledge of art history enhancing the official guide's explanations of the palace's treasures. "Look at the brushwork in this portrait," he murmured, guiding me toward a particularly striking painting. "See how the artist captured the light on the silk of her gown?" Magnificent technique. I found myself seeing the art through new eyes, appreciating details I might have missed without his guidance. In turn, I shared my observations about the gardens we viewed from the palace windows, drawing on my longtime love of horticulture. The formal parterres would have been filled with annuals in summer, I explained, changed seasonally to ensure continuous color and interest. It would have required an army of gardeners to maintain. "You know quite a bit about gardens," Edward observed. "I used to have a large vegetable and flower garden in Vermont," I said, surprised by the wistfulness in my voice. "I miss it. The planning, the planting, watching things grow." "Perhaps you'll have another garden someday," Edward suggested. "Perhaps," I agreed, though my small condo in Boston offered little opportunity for serious gardening. For now, I'm content to admire others' efforts. That evening, we attended a concert of Viennese classical music in a historic concert hall in the city center. The program featured Mozart, Strauss, and other Austrian composers, performed by musicians in period costume. As the familiar strains of the Blue Danube waltz filled the ornate hall, I closed my eyes, allowing the music to wash over me. Harold would have loved this, I thought. He would have sat just as I was sitting now, eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. The realization brought not sadness, but a deep sense of connection, as if I were experiencing this moment for both of us. After the concert, Edward and I walked slowly back to where our transportation waited, the evening mild enough that we didn't need our jackets. "I was watching you during the Strauss," Edward said. "You looked transported." "I was thinking of Harold," I admitted. "He loved waltzes. We used to dance in our living room sometimes after dinner. He wasn't very good, always counting under his breath, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but he enjoyed it so much." Edward smiled. "Margaret was the musical one in our marriage. I have a decent ear but no real talent. She used to play for me every evening, Chopin, Debussy, whatever mood struck her. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear piano music for almost 2 years." "And now?" I asked. "Now I can listen again and feel grateful for the memories rather than pained by the loss." He offered his arm as we approached a slightly uneven section of pavement. Time doesn't heal all wounds, contrary to the old saying, but it does change how we carry them. I took his arm, appreciating both the physical support and the emotional insight. "Yes, exactly. The grief changes shape, becomes something you can live with, rather than something that threatens to drown you." Back on the ship, we parted at my cabin with plans to meet for breakfast before the next day's exploration of Vienna. I entered my suite to find my evening turn-down service completed as usual, but with an addition: a small gift box placed on my pillow. Curious, I opened it to find a delicate silver charm in the shape of a grand piano, with a note in Edward's distinctive handwriting. "A small memento of Vienna and new friendships. The music continues." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't an expensive gift, not showy or presumptuous, but perfectly chosen to commemorate our shared experience and our conversations about lost loved ones who had valued music. I was still holding the charm when my phone chimed with a text message from Emma. "Grandma, when are you coming home? Dad says you might not help with us anymore when you get back." "Is that true? Are you mad at us?" My heart clenched at the worry evident in her words. I had spoken with all 3 children several times during the cruise, sharing photos and stories of my adventures. but had deliberately avoided discussing the changes that would come when I returned. Now it seemed James had raised the issue with Emma, framing it in terms that would naturally cause her anxiety. "Of course I'm not mad at you, sweetheart," I texted back. "I love you, Lucas, and Lily more than anything. I'll be home in 5 days, and I'll still see you regularly. But things will be a little different. I won't be available every day like before. We'll work out a schedule that works for everyone." Her response came quickly. "Dad says it's because you're being selfish and only thinking about yourself." The accusation, even secondhand, stung deeply. Was that really how James was explaining my decision to his children? As selfishness rather than self-respect? "That's not true," I wrote carefully. "Sometimes adults have different perspectives on things. Your dad is upset because he's used to me being available whenever he needs help. But at my age, I need to think about how I want to spend my time, just like you will when you're older. It doesn't mean I love you any less." There was a longer pause before her next message. "Mom says we should respect your decision, but that will probably see you a lot less because you'll be busy with your own life." I sighed, recognizing Margaret's passive-aggressive tactics. She was technically supporting my decision while simultaneously planting seeds of abandonment anxiety in the children. "I'll never be too busy for you three," I assured Emma. "We'll still have regular time together. It just might look a little different than before. Maybe you can come stay with me some weekends, or we can plan special outings together." "That sounds cool," she responded, her tone lightening. "Can we go to museums and stuff? I want to see the things you're seeing in Europe." "Absolutely," I promised. "We'll have lots of adventures together." After saying goodnight to Emma, I sat on the edge of my bed, turning the silver piano charm in my fingers. The conversation had left me unsettled, annoyed at James and Margaret for manipulating the children's emotions rather than helping them understand the situation in age-appropriate ways. But beneath the annoyance was a growing resolve. I would not be guilt-tripped into resuming my previous role as on-demand childcare provider. I would establish healthy boundaries while maintaining loving relationships with my grandchildren. And perhaps most importantly, I would be honest about my financial situation when I returned, clearing up the fundamental misunderstanding that seemed to underlie so much of the tension. The next morning at breakfast, I shared the gist of my conversation with Emma with Edward, seeking his perspective. As someone removed from the emotional complexities of the situation, "It sounds like classic manipulation," he observed, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Using the children's emotions as leverage to pressure you into resuming your previous role." "Exactly," I agreed, relieved that he understood. "And what bothers me most is that they're causing the children unnecessary anxiety in the process." "What will you do when you return?" Edward asked. "Will you tell them about your financial situation?" I considered the question, watching the Austrian countryside slide by outside the dining room windows. "Yes," I decided. "I think it's time for complete honesty. Not to justify my decisions, but to correct their misperceptions and establish a new foundation for our relationship going forward." Edward nodded approvingly. "I think that's wise. A clean slate, a fresh beginning." "It won't be easy," I acknowledged. "James might feel betrayed that I kept this from him for so long. He might wonder why I didn't help them financially if I had the means." "Perhaps," Edward agreed. "But you can explain that you were helping in the way you thought most valuable, with your time and presence, and that you've been quietly contributing to the children's future education all along." His framing resonated with me, offering a perspective I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. I had been helping, just not in the most obvious financial ways. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for listening, for understanding. It helps to talk through this with someone who isn't emotionally invested in the outcome." Edward's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Oh, I wouldn't say I'm not emotionally invested. I've become quite fond of you, Ruth Bennett. I want to see you flourish in this new chapter of your life." The warmth of his words carried me through the day as we explored more of Vienna, visiting the Belvedere Palace with its magnificent Klimt collection and taking a guided tour of the Vienna State Opera. By the time we returned to the ship in the late afternoon, I felt a deep sense of contentment despite the lingering concerns about my return home. That evening, as the ship prepared to leave Vienna for our next stop in Budapest, I stood on my balcony watching the city's lights recede into the distance. My phone chimed with a text message from James, the first direct communication since our heated call several days earlier. "Mom, we need to talk. Really talk, not argue. Can we FaceTime tomorrow? Just you and me. No Margaret." The message surprised me. James rarely sought one-on-one conversations with me, particularly without Margaret's involvement in family matters. "Of course," I replied. "I'm free around 10 a.m. my time, if that works for you." "I'll make it work," he texted back. "And Mom, I'm sorry for what I said earlier, about you being selfish. I was frustrated and said things I didn't mean." The apology was unexpected and welcome, though it didn't erase the hurt his words had caused, particularly when repeated to his children. "Thank you for apologizing," I wrote. "I look forward to talking tomorrow." I put my phone away and returned to watching the lights of Vienna fade into the night, wondering what had prompted James's change in tone. Perhaps he'd simply had time to reflect on our situation. Perhaps Margaret had urged him to make peace before my return. Or perhaps he'd realized that antagonizing me wasn't the most effective way to ensure continued help with childcare, even on a reduced basis. Whatever his motivation, I welcomed the opportunity for a calmer, more productive conversation, and perhaps this would be the right moment to share the truth about my financial situation, not as a response to accusations of selfishness, but as part of an honest reassessment of our family dynamics. The next morning, I found a quiet corner of the ship's library and set up my tablet for the FaceTime call with James. When his face appeared on the screen, I was struck by how tired he looked. Shadows under his eyes, tension lines around his mouth that hadn't been there when I left. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice subdued. "How's the cruise?" "Wonderful," I said honestly. "We're on our way to Budapest now. Vienna was absolutely magical." "We?" James picked up on the pronoun immediately. "You're traveling with someone?" I hadn't meant to mention Edward so soon, but there was no reason to hide his existence. "I've made a friend on the cruise," I explained. "A retired professor from England. We've been having meals together and joining the same excursion groups." "A professor?" James repeated, his expression unreadable. "That's nice. I'm glad you're not alone." There was an awkward pause as we both searched for the right words to bridge the tension of our last conversation. "You wanted to talk?" I prompted gently. James sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it made my heart ache with sudden nostalgia. "Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last call, about how we've been treating you. Taking you for granted. Emma said something that really hit home. Oh. I was curious what insight my 12-year-old granddaughter might have offered. She asked why we never pay you when Aunt Shelley expects to be paid for the same work." James looked genuinely troubled. And I didn't have a good answer. Because your family? Because you offered? None of it sounded right once I actually said it out loud. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. "The truth, I guess. That we've been unfair to you. That we've been taking advantage of your generosity without really acknowledging it or appreciating it properly." His admission surprised me. James had always been stubborn, resistant to admitting when he was wrong. This level of self-awareness was new. "Thank you for recognizing that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear you say it." "Mom, I've been looking into childcare options for when you get back," he continued. "Professional nannies, after-school programs, that sort of thing. And the reality is, we can technically afford it, but it would mean cutting back on some other things. The kids' activities, our vacation plans, maybe even downsizing the house eventually. I nodded, unsurprised by this assessment. Many families face those kinds of trade-offs, James. It's part of the calculus of raising children. I know that now, he acknowledged. But for so long, we didn't have to make those choices because you were there, filling in all the gaps. We built a lifestyle around your availability without really considering what it cost you in terms of your own life and choices. His insight was so aligned with what I'd been thinking that I was momentarily speechless. The thing is, Mom, James continued into the silence, I don't want to lose you in the kids' lives. They adore you. Whatever we work out when you get back, I want it to be sustainable for everyone. If that means 2 days a week instead of 5, or no evenings, or whatever boundaries you need to set, we'll make it work. That means a lot to me, James, I said, genuinely moved by his shift in perspective. I love the children dearly, and I want to continue being a significant presence in their lives. I just need some time for myself, too. Of course you do, he agreed, looking chagrined. And you shouldn't have had to go to Europe to make that point. We should have seen it ourselves, respected your time and energy much sooner. The conversation was going so much better than I'd anticipated that I decided to take the leap I'd been contemplating. James, there's something important I need to tell you. Something I probably should have shared long ago. He looked concerned. Are you okay? Mom, your health is good, right? I'm perfectly healthy, I assured him. This is about my financial situation. Oh. He looked confused but attentive. What about it? I took a deep breath. When your father died, he left me with more than just the house in Vermont. He had been investing consistently throughout our marriage, building a portfolio that has continued to grow under my management. James's brow furrowed. Okay. How much are we talking about? My current net worth is a little over $2.3 million, I said quietly. James's jaw dropped. 2.3 million? Mom, what? How? I mean, what? His shock would have been comical if the implications weren't so serious. Your father was always very careful with money, very strategic about investing, and I've continued to manage the portfolio using the principles he taught me. But all these years, you've been living in that tiny condo, driving that old car, wearing the same clothes season after season. James struggled to reconcile this new information with his perception of my life. I live simply because that's what I prefer, I explained. I don't need or want a lavish lifestyle, but I'm not financially dependent, James. I never have been. So when Margaret and I worried about you being able to support yourself in retirement, it was unnecessary, I confirmed, though I appreciated the concern. James shook his head, clearly struggling to process this revelation. Why didn't you tell us? It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd rehearsed an answer for. Yet, in the moment, I found myself searching for the right words. Initially, it didn't seem relevant, I said slowly. I was helping with Emma because I wanted to, because I loved her and you and wanted to support your family during a difficult time. The financial aspect didn't matter. And later? James pressed. Later. I suppose I began to realize that if you knew, the nature of our relationship might change. That you might see me differently, or feel I should be contributing financially rather than with my time. I sighed. And perhaps I worried that if you knew I wasn't financially dependent on your goodwill, you might not make space for me in your lives at all. The hurt in James's eyes was evident even through the video call. You thought we only valued you for the free childcare? That we wouldn't want you around otherwise? Not consciously, I hastened to clarify. But looking back, I think that fear was there, unacknowledged. As the years went by, as your lives got busier, and our interactions centered more and more exclusively around the children's needs, it became easier to maintain the status quo than to risk disrupting it. James was quiet for a long moment, processing. You know what the worst part is. I'm not sure you were wrong. Not about us only valuing you for childcare. We've always loved you, Mom, always wanted you in our lives. But about how knowing might have changed things. His honesty was both painful and appreciated. How so? I asked. If we'd known you had that kind of financial security, we might have asked for different kinds of help, contributions to the kids, college funds, maybe help with the mortgage during tight times. It would have changed the dynamic for sure. He looked troubled by his own admission. And that's not fair. Not to you. It's human nature, I said gently. And I've actually been contributing to the children's education all along. I've set up accounts for each of them. Emma has about $75,000 already, and the twins each have about $60,000. I was planning to reveal those when they were ready for college. James looked stunned all over again. Mom, that's incredibly generous. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I assured him. I wanted to do it. I love them, and I want them to have every opportunity possible. So all this time, when we thought we were supporting you by including you in family life, you were actually supporting us in ways we didn't even know about. Put that way, the irony was inescapable. I suppose so, I acknowledged. Though I never saw it as a transaction. I was simply doing what I could, in the ways that felt most natural to me. James shook his head, looking both amazed and chagrined. I'm trying to process all this. It's a lot to take in. I know, I said sympathetically, and I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. I should have been more transparent. No, I'm the one who should apologize, James insisted, for assuming I understood your situation when I clearly didn't, for taking your help for granted all these years, for not considering that you might have your own resources, your own capabilities beyond what we asked of you. His words touched me deeply. Thank you for that, James. It means more than you know. So what happens now? He asked. When you get back from Europe, what do you want your life to look like? It was the question I'd been pondering throughout. The cruise, as I discovered new interests and capabilities within myself. I'd like to travel more, I said thoughtfully. Not just big trips like this one, but weekend excursions, day trips to museums and gardens. I'd like to take some cooking classes, maybe join a book club, and I'd like to spend quality time with my grandchildren, not just supervising homework or driving them to activities, but really engaging with them, sharing experiences that enrich all our lives. That sounds wonderful, Mom, James said, and his smile seemed genuine. We'll make it work, I promise. And I'll talk to Margaret about adjusting our family budget to accommodate more paid childcare. I appreciate that, I said, and I'm still happy to help on a regular schedule, maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays. That would give me the other weekdays for my own activities, while still providing you with consistent support. That's more than fair, James agreed readily. And maybe some occasional evenings for special events? We'd give you plenty of notice, of course. That seems reasonable, I said, pleased with how quickly we were reaching a workable compromise. We talked for a few more minutes, working out the practical details of this new arrangement. As we were about to end the call, James hesitated, then asked, So this professor friend of yours, is it serious? The question caught me off guard. Edward, we've only known each other a week, James. We're just enjoying each other's company. But you like him? James pressed, a hint of protective sun in his tone. I smiled, thinking of Edward's kindness, his intelligence, his gentle humor. Yes, I like him very much. He's thoughtful and interesting and treats me with respect. It's been nice to be seen that way. James looked slightly abashed. I'm glad, Mom. You deserve that. After Dad died, I never really thought about you dating again. that was selfish of me. It wasn't selfish, I assured him. It simply wasn't. Relevant for a very long time. I wasn't interested in meeting someone new. I still don't know if I am, not in that way. But I am enjoying Edward's friendship immensely. Well, I look forward to hearing more about him when you get home, James said, and I was grateful for his supportive tone. Have a wonderful time in Budapest. The kids can't wait to see your pictures. After ending the call, I sat in the library for a long while, processing the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. James's apology had seemed genuine, his willingness to adjust family arrangements sincere, and his acceptance of my financial revelation had been far more measured and thoughtful than I'd anticipated. Perhaps I had underestimated my son. Perhaps, beneath the entitlement that had developed over years of my unquestioning availability, there was still the thoughtful, empathetic boy I had raised. Perhaps our relationship could evolve into something healthier, more balanced, more reflective of who we both truly were. With a lighter heart than I'd felt in weeks, I went to find Edward. He was on the sun deck, reading a book about Hungarian architecture in preparation for our arrival in Budapest the next day. How did it go? He asked, setting the book aside as I settled into the lounger next to his. Surprisingly well, I said, still somewhat amazed by the fact. James apologized for taking my help for granted. He acknowledged that they've built their lifestyle around my availability without considering the cost to me, and he accepted the news about my financial situation with more grace than I expected. That's wonderful, Edward said, his smile reflecting my own sense of relief. So you told him everything? About the investments, yes, and about the children's education accounts I've set up. We've worked out a preliminary schedule for when I return, 2 regular days a week, plus occasional evenings for special events. And he was agreeable to that arrangement? More than agreeable. He seemed genuinely concerned about establishing a sustainable system that respects my need for personal time. The remaining 5 days of my cruise passed in a blur of beautiful landscapes, historic cities, and deepening friendship with Edward. Budapest proved to be the jewel of the journey. Its magnificent Parliament building glowing amber against the night sky as we cruised past on an evening excursion, the ancient thermal baths where Edward and I spent a rejuvenating afternoon, the vibrant markets where I purchased final souvenirs for the grandchildren. On our last evening aboard, the ship hosted a farewell gala. I wore a midnight blue dress I'd purchased in Vienna, a simple but elegant garment that made me feel both sophisticated and confident. You look absolutely stunning, Edward said when I met him for pre-dinner champagne. Budapest agrees with you. Freedom agrees with me. I corrected him gently. Being seen for who I am agrees with me. At dinner, surrounded by fellow passengers who had become friends over the past 2 weeks, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in my circumstances, but in my perception of myself. I was no longer just James's mother or the children's grandmother. I was Ruth Bennett, a woman of substance and capability, with interests and desires of my own. When it came time to disembark the next morning, Edward and I exchanged contact, information, and a promise to stay in touch. This isn't goodbye, he assured me, merely until we meet again. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Arriving home felt strange after the luxury and stimulation of the cruise. My condo seemed smaller, emptier somehow. But as I unpacked my souvenirs and laundry, I realized it wasn't the space that had changed. It was me. The morning after my return, I called James. "Welcome home, Mom," he said warmly. "The kids can't wait to see you. Should we come over this afternoon?" "Actually," I said, "I'd like to meet at Gardner's Park instead. There's a nice cafe there, and the children can play afterward." The park was neutral territory, not their home where I had always served, not my condo where they rarely visited. A fresh setting for our new beginning. When they arrived, Emma spotted me first, breaking into a run across the grass. "Grandma, I caught her in a fierce hug, then opened my arms to Lucas and Lily, who followed close behind. "We missed you so much," Lily exclaimed. "Did you bring us presents?" Lucas asked, earning a sharp, "Lucas?" from Margaret. "Of course I did," I laughed, pulling 3 carefully wrapped packages from my bag. The children's delight in their gifts, the glass ornament for Emma, the wooden train for Lucas, the gingerbread man for Lily, warmed my heart. But it was Margaret's reaction to her gift that surprised me most. "You didn't have to get me anything," she said, genuine confusion in her voice as she unwrapped the beautiful scarf. "I wanted to," I said simply. "It reminded me of your eyes." Margaret blinked rapidly, touched by the gesture she clearly hadn't expected. "Thank you, Ruth. It's lovely." Over coffee while the children played nearby, James, Margaret, and I finalized our new arrangement. I would take the children on Tuesdays and Thursdays from after school until dinner. For special events requiring evening childcare, they would give me at least a week's notice, and I could decline if I had other plans. "That seems more than fair," Margaret acknowledged, "and we'll compensate you for any additional time beyond the regular schedule." "That's not necessary," I began, but James interrupted me. "It is necessary, Mom. Your time has value. We understand that now." The acknowledgement meant more to me than the money ever could. 6 months later, the new rhythm of our lives had taken hold. 2 days a week with the grandchildren became precious, focused time rather than endless obligation. I took them to museums, botanical gardens, and cultural events, sharing my newfound passions and watching their interests blossom in response. The other days filled quickly with activities I'd long postponed: a cooking class specializing in international cuisines, a book club at the local library, volunteer work at a community garden where I finally got my hands back in the soil. I also began transforming my condo from a mere stopping place into a true home, repainting the walls in warm colors, purchasing comfortable furniture, creating a small container garden on my balcony. Edward and I maintained our connection through daily emails and weekly video calls. 3 months after the cruise, he visited Boston for a week, staying in a hotel downtown but spending most days with me. I showed him my city's historic sites and introduced him to James and the children, who were instantly charmed by his British accent and gentle manner. "He's nice," Emma said afterward. "Are you going to marry him?" "Good heavens, no," I laughed. "We're just good friends enjoying each other's company." But when Edward invited me to visit him in England that fall, I accepted without hesitation. "I never thought I'd see my mother gallivanting around the world with a dashing professor," James teased when I told him about my plans. "There are many things we never imagined for each other," I replied. "But that's the joy of life, isn't it? The unexpected turns, the new beginnings." "I'm happy for you, Mom," he said sincerely. "Really happy." One evening, as I tended my balcony herbs, I received a text from Margaret. "The twins have a school presentation Thursday. They really want you to come. I know it's not your usual day, but would you consider it?" The request was polite, respectful of my time and boundaries. So different from the expectation of availability that had characterized our relationship for so many years. "I'd be delighted to attend," I texted back. "Thank you for inviting me." As I watched the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, I thought about how far we'd all come. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations, moments of tension, old habits reasserting themselves. But gradually, steadily, we had built something new and healthier. I was no longer just a babysitter. I was a grandmother, a friend, a traveler, a gardener, a woman with her own full life who chose to share her time out of love rather than obligation. Sometimes standing up for yourself means walking away entirely. But sometimes, as in my case, it means redefining the terms of engagement, insisting on respect and recognition, and creating space for your own dreams alongside your love for others. At 70, I had finally learned that lesson. And in learning it, I had given my grandchildren something far more valuable than unlimited childcare, the example of a woman who valued herself enough to demand the same of others.